Yeah, babe, let's get her to move in with us. Mom's retired, she can help with the bills. She's got plenty of money, that old woman doesn't need as much as we do. I'll make sure she gives me her pension. That was my son, Anthony, Tony whispering to his wife, Chantel, in the kitchen of their trendy downtown loft, the one I was living in and paying $1,500 a month to subsidize. He thought I was asleep in the cramped guest room, exhausted from helping watch their kids all day. He thought wrong. 40 years as a senior financial analyst for the city's transit authority, managing multi-million-dollar budgets under intense scrutiny, teaches you to listen to the numbers, yes, but also to the whispers, the nuances, the things left unsaid, or said when they think no one is listening. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the expected stab of hurt. What I felt was a sudden chilling clarity, like a spreadsheet clicking into perfect alignment, revealing the ugly bottom line. My son didn't see me as his mother, he saw me as a resource to be exploited, an old woman whose hard-earned pension was his for the taking. For the next 6 days he couldn't look me in the eye. On Monday morning he showed up bright and early, grinning, with Chantal and a rented moving truck, ready, I suppose, to officially move more of their stuff in, solidify their claim on my old room, perhaps even subtly pressure me towards that pension conversation. But when they walked inside the loft they thought was their domain, and saw what I'd done in the quiet hours before dawn, pure unadulterated panic, their jaws literally dropped. Let me tell you about the son who saw his mother as a walking ATM, and the swift, decisive financial lesson he never ever saw coming. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. First, let me tell you who I really am, because clearly my own son had no idea, to Tony, and by extension his perpetually dissatisfied wife Chantal. I was always just Esther Brown, mom, retired city employee, widow. A quiet, sensible woman living a quiet, sensible life. They saw the 40 years I spent hunched over spreadsheets at the transit authority, managing budgets, forecasting revenues, ensuring the buses and trains ran on time, and more importantly, on budget. They likely pictured me as some kind of glorified bookkeeper, dealing with mundane numbers, certainly nothing glamorous or high-powered. They saw my modest lifestyle, the comfortable but unassuming condo I owned outright, the reliable if slightly boring sedan I drove, the simple classic clothes I preferred, the home-cooked meals I enjoyed preparing, and they interpreted it as evidence of limitation, a life lived within the narrow confines of a civil servant's salary and pension. What they didn't see, what they never bothered to ask about, was the reality behind the title Senior Financial Analyst. They didn't see the complex modeling, the high-stakes negotiations with City Council, the management of bond issues worth hundreds of millions, the sheer intellectual rigor required to keep a massive, chronically underfunded public transit system solvent year after year. They didn't see the woman who could spot budget discrepancies from a mile away, who understood the subtle language of compound interest better than they understood the lyrics to their pop music, who had spent a lifetime treating money not as a toy but as a serious, powerful tool to be wielded with discipline and foresight. I wasn't just good with numbers, I was a shark in a sea of political appointees and bureaucratic red tape, and I always balanced my books. And they certainly never saw the actual numbers of my personal life. My late husband David, a wonderful steady man, who worked as a skilled electrician, shared my frugal, pragmatic approach to life. We were children of parents who remembered the Depression. Save first, spend what's left wasn't a catchphrase, it was a commandment. We lived well below our means, always. We saved diligently. We invested wisely, not in flashy trends or get-rich-quick schemes, but in solid, diversified portfolios, guided by careful, obsessive research and a healthy dose of professional skepticism. My city pension was excellent, yes, a rock-solid foundation, but it was merely the reliable bedrock upon which I had built a much more substantial structure through decades of disciplined saving, shrewd investment choices. I understood the power of compounding dividends, and the full payout from David's life insurance, which I'd responsibly invested rather than spent. I never talked about it. Flaunting wealth felt vulgar, tacky, and more importantly, unnecessary. My security wasn't dependent on their perception of me, so I lived simply, enjoying the freedom my financial independence provided, the freedom to retire early, the freedom to travel quietly when I pleased. Something my son assumed I never did, The freedom to say no. When I retired last year, I wasn't just comfortable, I was by any reasonable standard wealthy. Quietly, securely, independently, and entirely secretly wealthy. Tony and Chantel, however, inhabited a different financial universe. Theirs was a world built on image, on aspiration, on the shaky foundation of fake it till you make it. Tony worked in high-end car sales, a commission-based job that yielded wildly fluctuating income. One month he was closing a killer deal, the next he was complaining about a brutal quarter. He drove a flashy black BMW leased I knew, and costing a fortune in insurance. He wore expensive watches likely bought on high-interest payment plans. He talked constantly, loudly about crushing quotas and closing whales, projecting an image of high-flying success that always seemed slightly desperate. Chantel worked part-time as a freelance graphic designer, her income equally unpredictable, yet her taste ran towards expensive organic grocery stores, boutique fitness classes and trendy home decor that seemed to change with the seasons. They lived in a stylish rented loft apartment downtown that cost an astronomical amount, a glass box in the sky that must have eaten half their income. They were constantly complaining about being house poor, perpetually slammed, and so stressed about money, all while simultaneously posting photos of $15 artisanal coffees, weekend getaways to wine country, and new designer outfits. Their finances were a house of cards, and they seemed to be in a constant, breathless race to add another more impressive card to the top before the whole thing collapsed. Their financial recklessness made my analyst's brain itch, but they were adults. It wasn't my place to lecture. Until that is, they made their problems mine. It started 6 months ago. They'd been complaining for months about the insanity of the rental market and their complete inability to save for a down payment, which was hardly surprising given their spending habits. They came to me with a proposal, a brilliant, two-pronged attack, beautifully wrapped in the language of familial concern. Mom, Tony had begun, his voice laced with that practiced, earnest sincerity he used to close a deal. We're really worried about you. Rattling around in that big condo all by yourself now that you're retired. My condo wasn't big. It was a comfortable, manageable 2-bedroom, 2-bath, but big served his narrative. It's a lot of upkeep, and honestly we miss having you around. Then came the pitch delivered with Chantel's wide-eyed faux innocent charm. We had an idea, Esther, she'd said, clasping her hands together. What if you rented out your condo? Just for a year or two. The rental market in your neighborhood is so hot right now you could make a fantastic passive income. And while it's rented, she'd paused, as if the brilliance of the idea was just striking her. You could move in with us. We have that spare room. It would be temporary, of course, just until we can get our own finances back on our feet. Maybe save up a real down payment with your help. You'd be helping us so much, and you wouldn't be alone. We could take care of you. The flaws in their logic were cavernous. Renting out my fully paid-off mortgage-free condo where my living expenses were minimal, to move into their cramped, noisy spare room, which I knew was barely large enough for a bed, and subsidize their lifestyle while sacrificing my own peace, privacy, and independence. It made no financial sense whatsoever. It was, from an analytical standpoint, a terrible deal. But they were family. Tony was my only child. And buried beneath the layers of manipulative self-serving framing, I heard a genuine note of financial panic in their voices. Perhaps they really were struggling more than I realized. Perhaps they just needed a temporary boost, a chance to regroup, to get their feet under them. The mother in me, the part that still saw the little boy who used to hold my hand, wrestled with the analyst, who saw only bad risk and poor planning. Against my better financial judgment, against every warning bell clanging in my analyst's brain, the mother in me relented. Okay, I agreed, setting what I thought were firm, clear conditions. 1 year, that's it. I'll rent out the condo through a professional property manager. I'll move in with you, and I will contribute a fair fixed amount towards the increased household expenses, let's say $1,500 a month, based on the extra costs of food, utilities. This was, I knew, far more than my share, but I framed it as a gesture of support. But Tony, Chantel, this has to be temporary. You must use this time, this opportunity to get your own finances in order. Save, budget, cut back. They agreed readily, almost too readily, showering me with hugs and effusive, relieved gratitude. Of course, Mom. Absolutely. You're a lifesaver. I signed a 1-year lease with a nice young couple for my condo, handled by a reputable property manager. I packed up the essentials, the furniture I couldn't part with, my good sofa, the dining set David and I had bought, my favorite armchair, and put the rest of my life's belongings into a climate-controlled storage unit. I moved into their cramped, noisy, stylishly appointed spare room, and I began like clockwork to transfer $100 to their joint account on the first of every month. I thought I was offering a lifeline, a structured support plan to help my son and his wife achieve financial stability. I didn't realize until that whispered conversation in the dark that they saw me not as a lifeline but as a piggy bank, one they had just successfully moved into their own home and were now, with chilling calculation, plotting to crack open permanently. My new existence in Tony and Chantal's trendy but financially precarious loft apartment quickly devolved from temporary supportive family member enjoying retirement to permanent, on-site ATM and domestic convenience operating under duress. The initial wave of relieved gratitude, as thin as Chantal's designer t-shirts, evaporated almost instantly upon my arrival, replaced by a pervasive, insidious sense of expectation and burgeoning entitlement that thickened the air like cheap, cloying perfume. The $1,500 monthly contribution, a sum I had carefully calculated to generously cover any conceivable increase in household costs, food, utilities, etc., plus a significant buffer, was accepted not as the substantial, voluntary help it was, but as a baseline, an expected minimum, rent. It vanished instantly, without acknowledgement, into the black hole of their lifestyle, funding their designer coffee habits, their endless subscription boxes for everything from artisanal cheese to curated dog toys, their daily barrage of online shopping deliveries arriving in crisp new cardboard boxes. It became painfully clear, very quickly, that my contribution wasn't alleviating their financial struggles or helping them save, as they'd claimed. It was merely enabling them to maintain their unsustainable spending habits with slightly less immediate day-to-day panic. I wasn't helping them get back on their feet. I was just patting the floor so they wouldn't feel the impact of their next financial stumble. Then, with my monthly contribution firmly established as their new normal, the borrowing began. It was a slow, insidious creep at first, a campaign of 1,000 tiny cuts, which quickly escalated into a full-blown assault on my personal savings, the savings they weren't even supposed to know existed beyond my pension. It started small, almost innocuously, designed to test the waters. "Hey Mom," Tony would say casually, his wallet conveniently left on his dresser as he was heading out the door. So embarrassing, totally forgot my wallet. "Can you spot me $20 for lunch with a client?" Total brain freeze. "I'll pay you back tonight, promise." He never did. Tonight would bleed into tomorrow, then next week, then simply be forgotten. Absorbed into the ether of his chronic financial disorganization, dismissed as too small an amount to matter to him anyway. Then the amounts grew. The excuses more elaborate. "Ugh, Mom, absolute disaster," he'd announce dramatically, running a hand through his already perfectly styled, expensive-looking hair. "My biggest commission check of the quarter is delayed. Typical corporate red tape. You know how it is, and the lease payment on the Beamer is due tomorrow. They're total sharks about it. Could you possibly, just possibly, lend me like $500? Just till Friday. Swear on my life I'll pay you back the second that check clears." Friday, of course, would come and go. The check, if it ever existed, never seemed to clear, or perhaps it was simply diverted to some other pressing lifestyle emergency like the new gaming console that appeared that weekend. The loan was never mentioned again, until the next crisis inevitably arose, usually around the 28th of the month. Chantal, observing Tony's success, soon joined the chorus. Her requests were often more manipulative, wrapped in layers of emotional blackmail and feigned vulnerability, targeting my maternal instincts directly. "Oh Esther," she'd sigh dramatically, scrolling pointedly through an online boutique on her oversized laptop while I was trying to read quietly in the living room. My designated quiet time constantly interrupted. "This silk dress, it would be perfect for that networking gala Tony needs me to go to. You know, the one with all the potential venture capital investors. It's so important for his brand. But my biggest freelance payment is late again. Those clients are just impossible. Could you maybe, just this once, cover it for me? I'll pay you back as soon as they pay me." The payment, like Tony's commissions, seemed to be perpetually lost in the digital mail. Reluctantly, fueled by a lingering, deeply ingrained and increasingly misplaced sense of maternal obligation, and a desperate, weary desire to avoid the inevitable conflict and passive-aggressive sulking that would follow a refusal, I lent them the money. At first. But the financial analyst in me, The part that lived and breathed numbers couldn't help but document the outflow. I kept a small discreet ledger hidden in my room. Date, amount, recipient, reason given, payback date, always missed. The list grew alarmingly fast. It became painfully, unavoidably clear this wasn't temporary borrowing between family members during a mutually supportive rough patch. This was a systematic, relentless, one-way siphoning of my resources. They saw my willingness to help, my quiet nature, my refusal to engage in ugly confrontations, not as kindness, not as generosity, but as weakness, as an exploitable, renewable source of easy, consequence-free cash. My savings account, the one I had meticulously built over 40 years to secure my peace, my future, my independence, was rapidly becoming their emergency slush fund, the buffer that allowed them to continue their reckless, performative lifestyle without facing any real-world consequences. And beyond the direct, unending financial drain, their questions about my overall financial situation became increasingly pointed, persistent, almost interrogative. They were no longer just casually curious, they were actively prospecting, probing for deeper untapped reserves. "So Mom," Tony asked one evening, attempting a casual tone while pouring himself a glass of ridiculously expensive single malt scotch, a recent necessity he'd acquired, likely with my borrowed money. "That city pension you get, is it a fixed amount, or does it have like those cost of living increases built in? Inflation is brutal these days. Gotta make sure you're keeping up, protecting your assets." He framed it as concern for me, but his eyes held a greedy, calculating glint, like a wolf assessing the health of a sheep. Chantel would probe from a different, slightly more sophisticated angle, perhaps trying to impress me with her limited financial literacy, or maybe just parroting lines she'd heard from Tony. "Esther, those conservative bonds you mentioned you had your house money in, are they really the safest place for your capital right now with interest rates predicted to rise? The market is just so volatile." Tony was saying maybe you should consider diversifying into something with a potentially higher yield. He knows this fantastic guy, a real whiz with retirement portfolios. Again, the offer of help, the subtle, insidious suggestion that my own judgment honed over 40 years of professional high-stakes financial analysis was inadequate, outdated, that they knew better how to manage my money for me. They weren't just curious about my resources anymore. They were actively assessing them, evaluating their potential yield, likely already formulating plans for how they could access or control them more directly. My presence in their house, I finally fully realized, had become purely chillingly functional in their eyes. I was the emergency fund, always available for a tap. I was the reliable free babysitter when their usual sitter who cost money canceled, or when they simply wanted a spontaneous date night without the added inconvenient expense. I was the default cook when they were too exhausted from their busy, important lives of posting online and selling cars to bother with preparing a meal. My substantial monthly financial contribution, my willingness to lend them ever larger sums, my free domestic labor, it was all simply absorbed into the background noise of their entitled lives, utterly taken for granted, never acknowledged, certainly never ever appreciated. My own needs, my own comfort, my own desire for a quiet, independent retirement were not just secondary or tertiary, they were completely irrelevant, non-existent footnotes in the grand, self-aggrandizing narrative of their striving. The spare room, already small, felt even more cramped, more claustrophobic, as their own out-of-season clothes, discarded exercise equipment, and piles of Chantel's project materials inevitably spilled into my designated space, shrinking my world even further. My quiet mornings, once reserved for reading, meditation, and financial planning, were routinely shattered by their loud, performative phone calls, their blaring music, or the blender roaring like a jet engine as Chantel prepared her $30 ingredient wellness smoothie. My polite requests for simple basic consideration, like perhaps not having their noisy friends over for impromptu drunken parties that lasted until 2 a.m. on weeknights, were met with theatrical eye rolls from Chantel and barely concealed sighs of martyrdom from Tony. "God, Mom, can't we have a little fun? You only live once. Just put in some earplugs." I was living in their world, entirely on their terms, and my role was clearly, rigidly defined. Support system, utility, bank. The quiet resentment that had begun simmering within weeks of my arrival, now solidified into a cold, hard, inescapable anger. This wasn't the temporary helping hand I had naively, foolishly agreed to, hoping to foster family connection and help my son. This was a hostile occupation, and they weren't just occupying my temporary physical space, They were actively, strategically, and with chilling calculation planning a hostile takeover of my entire financial future. The overheard conversation, the one where they plotted to seize my pension, wasn't a sudden aberration born of desperation. It was merely the explicit verbalization of the parasitic plan they had already implicitly, insidiously put into motion the very moment I walked through their door. The moment of chilling, undeniable clarity. The moment my lingering maternal denial finally fractured against the hard, ugly, inescapable truth, arrived late one Thursday night about 8 months into my temporary stay. It wasn't delivered in a direct confrontation, not presented as a formal if manipulative proposal. It was overheard, a whispered conspiracy drifting clearly through the thin, poorly constructed despite the high rent walls of their trendy loft apartment. These were words never ever intended for my ears. Words that revealed the raw, unvarnished, ice-cold calculation beneath their performative day-to-day affection. I had pleaded exhaustion after dinner, another simple, healthy meal I had cooked and they had barely touched before opting for expensive, greasy Thai delivery. The discarded containers now stinking up the kitchen, I retreated to my small guest room not just to escape their presence but to do my own monthly financial review, a meticulous 40-year habit I refused to break, tracking my investments, balancing my secret accounts, ensuring my fortress remained secure. They must have thought I was sound asleep, worn out from my supposed day of doing nothing, except of course, providing 8 hours of free childcare for their 2 perpetually overstimulated, under-disciplined children, who had finally been retrieved by a babysitter for a weekend at their other grandparents' house. The fun ones, I gathered. I heard their bedroom door, which was just down the short, echoing hallway from mine, click shut, muffling the omnipresent sound of the oversized television they always left blaring in the living room like a digital hearth. Then their voices began, low at first, muffled by the wall, then growing clearer, sharper, as their conversation, clearly about their favorite topic, their own financial distress, intensified. Chantel spoke first, her voice laced with that familiar grating whine of acute financial anxiety, a constant undercurrent in their supposedly successful lives. "Tony, I'm serious this time. That Platinum American Express bill came today. It's astronomical, maxed out, and the lease payment on the new BMW is due on the 1st, not next week like you thought. We're completely totally tapped out. There's nothing left in the joint account. Again." "I know, babe. I know." Tony's voice was smooth, practiced, placating, the voice he used on nervous customers at the dealership, trying to upsell them on undercoating and extended warranties. But underneath the surface charm, I heard that cold, calculating undercurrent I had come to recognize. The sound of a man assessing angles, not feeling emotions. "Don't stress. It's a temporary cash flow issue. That big corporate fleet deal I was counting on, the one that was supposed to close last week, it got pushed back. Client got cold feet. Commission check is going to be way lower than I'd budgeted for this month. So what are we going to do?" Chantel sounded close to tears now. Genuine tears this time, fueled by the real, tangible fear of their precarious financial house of cards finally collapsing. "We can't keep borrowing bits and pieces from your mom forever. It's humiliating. What if she finally starts saying no? She's been looking at me funny lately when I ask." "Good," I thought grimly. My meticulous note-taking and slightly cooler demeanor were having at least some effect. "Exactly," Tony agreed quickly, seizing on her frustration, validating it, then pivoting, just as a good salesman would. "Which is precisely why we need a more permanent solution, a more systematic approach. We need to stop thinking about her like a temporary band-aid, and start thinking about her as a long-term asset. For everyone's benefit, of course." The oily, self-serving justification dripped from his words, making my stomach clench. He lowered his voice even further then, becoming conspiratorial, intimate, drawing her into his plot. "Listen, I've been thinking about this a lot. Mom's pension. It's rock solid, right? Good city pension, 40 years of service. Plus she must have survivor benefits from Dad's plan, right? Comes in like clockwork every single month. Dependable. Not like my commissions. Up and down." "Yeah, I guess," Chantal murmured uncertainly, perhaps sensing the dangerous, unethical direction his thoughts were heading, or perhaps just not yet grasping the full audacity of his plan. "But she's not just going to give it to us, Tony. She barely agreed to the $1,500 a month, and even that was like pulling teeth. A complete fabrication. I had offered the amount and they had accepted instantly." "Not give it, babe," Tony corrected smoothly, patiently, as if explaining a complex financial strategy to a simple-minded child. "She'll entrust it to us, voluntarily, for professional management. For safekeeping, for her own good. Think about it. She's retired now, she's getting older. I was 66 in perfect physical and mental health, and had literally managed multi-million-dollar budgets for a living. But these inconvenient, easily verifiable facts were clearly irrelevant to his self-serving, ageist narrative. All those different accounts, those direct deposits, those online bill payments, it's probably getting overwhelming for her, confusing. She's probably terrified of making a mistake, losing her money. He was painting a picture of me as a doddering, financially incompetent, frightened elder, ripe for intervention, desperate for a savior. He paused, letting the insidious, condescending suggestion hang heavy in the air between them. I held my breath, straining to hear every single damning word through the thin plaster wall. So, he continued, his voice now full of that false, oily, filial concern, the performance truly sickeningly masterful. Here's the plan. I'll sit down with her, have a real, loving heart-to-heart, express my deep, profound worry about her having to manage all that financial stress alone. Tell her I can't stand seeing her so stressed about money all the time. The irony, the sheer breathtaking hypocrisy almost made me laugh out loud. I wasn't stressed about money. They were, I'll suggest, purely for her convenience, her peace of mind, that she arranged to have her pension check directly deposited into our joint household account. Makes it so much easier, right? We can manage all the household bills automatically, from one central, transparent place. Her share, our share, everything streamlined, efficient, total transparency, of course. He chuckled softly then, a low, ugly, conspiratorial sound that made my skin crawl and my blood run cold. She won't suspect a single thing. She trusts me. I'm her son. She'll think I'm being the perfect, dutiful child. Finally stepping up to look out for her, take care of her in her old age. There was a pregnant, assessing silence. Then Chantel spoke again, her earlier uncertainty completely gone, replaced by a dawning, almost breathless, avaricious excitement that was even uglier than his calculation. Oh my God, Tony. That's actually kind of brilliant. Devious as hell, but brilliant. How much do you think her pension actually is? A couple thousand a month? Maybe 3. Probably more, Tony speculated confidently, clearly inflating the potential prize to further sell her on the scheme. Good city job, 40 years, plus survivor benefits, gotta be at least 3, maybe 4,000 easy. Could even be 5,000, tax-free. He was, as usual, wildly incorrect. He both underestimated my actual pension and completely fabricated the survivor benefits, but the principle remained the same. He was viewing my hard-earned retirement income as his potential, unearned slush fund. Wow, Chantel breathed, the greed palpable in her voice, practically vibrating through the wall. 5,000 a month. Wow, Tony, that would change everything. We could actually afford the mortgage payment on that new house in the suburbs we saw, the one with the pool. We could finally lease that new white BMW X5 I saw at your dealership. Oh my God, we'd be set. Her voice trailed off in a happy, materialistic daydream, already mentally spending my future security on her own fleeting, superficial desires. Exactly, Tony said, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction, reveling in his own perceived cleverness, basking in his wife's adoration. It's the perfect, long-term solution. She gets taken care of, she feels secure, believes she's being helped by her loving son. We get the financial breathing room we desperately need, the lifestyle we deserve. Everybody wins. He amended, with another low, ugly chuckle. Well, okay, mostly us. I'll talk to her sometime next week. Need to soften her up a bit first, though. Maybe mention how stressed we are financially, how worried we are about her managing all that pressure alone. Plant the seed gently, make her ask for the help. Okay, Chantel agreed eagerly, her voice now firm, resolute, a fully signed-up co-conspirator. Okay, babe, good plan, you're so smart. Just be careful how you phrase it. You're right, make her think it's her idea. Trust me, Tony murmured confidently, his voice full of arrogance. Sales is my superpower. She won't know what hit her. That old woman doesn't need as much as we do. Anyway, consider it done. I heard the distinct, intimate sound of a kiss, followed by the familiar creak of their bed springs as they presumably settled in for the night, dreaming sweet dreams of my pension funding their extravagant, unearned lifestyle. The conversation was over, the conspiracy was hatched, the betrayal was absolute, cold, and calculated. I lay there in the oppressive darkness of my small, borrowed room, utterly still, my body rigid, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. The room felt suddenly intensely cold. My heart was pounding, not with fear this time, not with shock, not even with grief. It was pounding with a cold, clear, diamond-hard rage, unlike anything I had ever experienced before in my entire 66 years. The sheer calculating mercenary nature of it, the casual callous betrayal, the deliberate cynical weaponization of my trust, my love, my perceived age, my fabricated vulnerability, the utter chilling, unforgivable lack of conscience, of basic human decency, of filial love. He wasn't just planning to ask for help. He wasn't just a desperate son making a bad choice. He was a predator planning to deceive, to manipulate his own mother into signing over her hard-earned, lifelong retirement income, the money meant to secure my future, my independence, my dignity, simply to fund their unsustainable, image-obsessed, fiscally irresponsible, parasitic lifestyle. And Chantal, his willing, eager accomplice, was already mentally redecorating the house they'd buy with my money, picking out the color of the new luxury car. The last lingering vestiges of maternal softness, of making excuses for him. He's just stressed, he's weak but good-hearted, of giving him the benefit of the doubt, evaporated completely, instantly, in that sickening moment. The financial analyst in me, the part trained for decades to identify fraud, to assess risk, to mitigate damage, to cut losses, took complete, absolute, and total control. My son, my only child, had just declared war on my financial security, on my future, on my very autonomy. He had mistaken my quiet nature for weakness. He had mistaken my modest living for poverty. He had mistaken my trust for stupidity. He had, in short, made a catastrophic life-altering miscalculation. And I, Esther Brown, senior financial analyst, retired, was about to teach him the most expensive, most permanent, and most satisfyingly just lesson of his pampered, entitled life. The lesson of consequences. The lesson of messing with the wrong, quiet old woman. My countermove was already forming, clear, cold, and precise. The 6 days following the overheard conspiracy unfolded like a predictable, albeit deeply unpleasant play. Tony, my son, the newly minted architect of my financial demise, transformed overnight from merely distant and occasionally irritable into a walking, talking embodiment of guilty avoidance. It was almost comical in a dark, pathetic way, if it weren't so profoundly insulting and revealing. He who usually dominated the breakfast table conversation with loud pronouncements about his latest killer sales pitch, or complaints about incompetent managers at the dealership, became strangely, unnaturally silent in my presence. His gaze, usually so direct and confident or perhaps just arrogant, would skitter away instantly if it happened to meet mine across the kitchen island. He developed an urgent, almost pathological need to take early morning phone calls out on the balcony for better reception, despite the freezing November air and the fact that reception was perfectly fine inside, or would suddenly remember an absolutely critical email he had to send right now. Just as I sat down with my morning coffee, necessitating a hasty retreat to his office, the small den downstairs, not yet the upgraded suite he coveted. His physical presence in the apartment seemed to decrease dramatically, almost to zero. He started coming home even later than usual, well after I had retired to my room, claiming a sudden inexplicable surge of mandatory client dinners or late-night team strategy sessions. On the weekend, the avoidance reached peak absurdity. He announced, with great performative reluctance, a sudden absolutely essential, cannot be missed golf outing with potential high-value clients that would regrettably take up all of Saturday. Networking, Mom, you understand, seal the deal. This was followed by an equally crucial, equally unavoidable charity networking brunch on Sunday morning. Have to show face, support the cause, make connections. He was actively, almost frantically engineering situations where our paths would simply not cross. His avoidance wasn't subtle. It was clumsy, obvious, almost adolescent in its lack of sophistication. He wore his guilt like a cheap, ill-fitting, brightly colored suit. He was, and always had been, a terrible liar, lacking the necessary finesse, the emotional intelligence to pull off deceit, convincingly. It was one of the traits I had, paradoxically, once found endearing, a sign perhaps of an underlying, uncorrupted core of decency. Now, however, his sheer incompetence at subterfuge simply served as irrefutable confirmation of his culpability. He couldn't look me in the eye because he knew what he was planning. He couldn't be in the same room because he feared his guilt was radiating off him like cheap cologne. Chantel, on the other hand, executed her assigned role in the conspiracy with considerably more skill, though no less transparency to my now hyper-alert senses. She went into full charm offensive mode, dialing up the forced sweetness and exaggerated concern to an almost suffocating degree. Her usual slightly cool distant politeness towards me morphed overnight into an almost syrupy wave of manufactured affection and solicitous attention. "Esther, dear," she'd coo, suddenly, jarringly, using the more formal version of my name again, perhaps believing it signaled a new level of respectful intimacy designed to soften me up. "Can I get you anything at all? More tea? A warmer blanket? Are you absolutely sure you're comfortable enough in that little room?" The same room she had previously deemed perfectly adequate. She started complimenting me excessively, transparently, almost desperately. "Oh, Esther, that beige cardigan looks so incredibly elegant on you. You have such classic style." It was the same practical, slightly pale beige cardigan I wore practically every single day around the apartment. "Dinner was absolutely divine tonight. Seriously, you have such a magic touch. Better than that overpriced place we went to last week." It was simple baked chicken and roasted vegetables prepared because Tony had claimed, hours earlier, that he wasn't hungry and they wouldn't be home for dinner, only to then arrive ravenous and devour 3 helpings without a word of thanks. She'd make a great show of asking about my day, her eyes wide with feigned interest, nodding intently, almost performatively, as I described my walk in the park or the latest plot twist in the library book I was reading. Then inevitably she would completely forget everything I'd said 5 minutes later, asking the same questions again or making a comment that revealed she hadn't absorbed a single word. Her performance of attentiveness, of caring, was exhausting to watch and deeply insulting in its transparent phoniness. She was playing the classic good cop to Tony's avoidant guilty cop, attempting to lull me into a false sense of security to make me feel cherished, valued, understood, right before they planned to financially fleece me. She was diligently greasing the wheels for Tony's impending pitch about the pension, trying to ensure I'd be psychologically receptive, emotionally softened up, perhaps even grateful for their generous offer to take control of my finances and relieve me of my supposed burdens. I observed this awkward, transparent, two-pronged psychological dance with a cool, analytical detachment, feeling less like a mother and more like a behavioral scientist observing predictable patterns in lab rats. Their coordinated yet clumsy behavior wasn't just confirming the authenticity of the overheard plot, it was confirming their utter lack of subtlety, their fundamental, almost insulting underestimation of my intelligence, my perceptiveness. They truly, genuinely believed I was oblivious to their machinations. They saw my continued quiet politeness, my ongoing fulfillment of expected household duties. I continued to cook and clean, partly out of habit, partly to maintain my cover, as acceptance, as normalcy, as proof that their plan was working perfectly. They couldn't conceive, not even for a moment, that my silence was not submission, but strategic observation, that my surface calm was not ignorance, but cold hard calculation, that my compliance was not weakness, but the deliberate lulling of the prey before the final strike. While Tony was out on the golf course presumably slicing balls into the rough and sweating over his impending act of betrayal, and while Chantel was showering me with false compliments and offers of herbal tea, I was quietly, methodically finalizing the execution of my counterplan. Each awkward interaction I endured, each avoided gaze from my son, each overly sweet, manipulative inquiry from my daughter-in-law about my well-being, simply served to strengthen my resolve, to reaffirm the necessity, the righteousness of the action I was about to take. They thought they were playing chess with a naive, easily manipulated pawn. They had no idea they were facing a seasoned grandmaster who had already seen the checkmate, 5 moves ahead, and was simply waiting with quiet, patient satisfaction for them to make their final fatal move onto the designated square. The 6 days of their avoidance weren't a period of waiting and worrying for me. They were a crucial final window for decisive action. And I used every single precious minute of it to ensure my victory would be absolute. While Tony practiced his golf swing, perfecting his backswing while rehearsing lines for his upcoming betrayal, and Chantel practiced her fake smiles, perfecting her performance of daughterly concern, I transformed my small cramped guest room into a temporary, highly secure financial command center. The door remained closed, my absence from the main living areas easily explained by a feigned headache or fatigue, playing into their narrative of my increasing frailty. Inside, however, I was anything but frail. My old reliable laptop, wiped clean and installed with encrypted communication software, became my primary tool, My encrypted hard drive containing decades of meticulously organized financial records, tax returns, and investment statements was plugged in and ready, and a newly purchased anonymous burner phone, activated with a minimal pay-as-you-go plan, became my secure line to the outside world. The skills honed over 40 years of managing complex city transit budgets, navigating treacherous institutional politics, and safeguarding public funds were now fully laser-focused, deployed for a single critical and deeply personal mission: fortifying my own financial fortress against the impending hostile takeover attempt from within my own family. My first and most crucial call, made on the burner phone using a heavily encrypted messaging app that left no discernible trace, was to Arthur Bell, my longtime financial advisor. Arthur was more than just an advisor who executed my trades. He was a trusted confidant, a contemporary, a man of impeccable discretion and old-school integrity who had helped me navigate my financial life since David's passing. He was also crucially aware of my general low-grade dissatisfaction with Tony and Chantel's financial recklessness and their sense of entitlement, though I hadn't burdened him with the full sordid details of my current living situation or their latest scheme, until now. "Arthur," I began, keeping my voice low, calm and steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "It's Esther Brown. I apologize for the secure channel, but the situation has become critical. I need to activate Protocol Nightingale, effective immediately." Protocol Nightingale wasn't some dramatic spy term. It was a dry, simple code phrase we had quietly established years ago, buried deep within my client agreement documentation. It was a contingency plan designed by Arthur and my lawyer, Sarah Jenkins, for exactly this kind of worst-case scenario, a situation where I might face undue influence, coercion, financial abuse, or sudden cognitive decline, though the latter thankfully was not yet an issue, despite Chantel's best efforts to manufacture evidence of it. Activating the protocol triggered a swift, decisive, pre-authorized series of legal and financial actions designed to shield my assets completely and irrevocably. "Understood, Esther," Arthur replied instantly, his voice serious, professional, asking no unnecessary questions, his tone indicating he grasped the gravity immediately. He knew the code phrase wasn't a drill. "Consider it activated as of this moment. What are your specific immediate instructions?" "First," I said, consulting the meticulous checklist I had prepared, leaving nothing to chance, "transfer the absolute legal minimum required by banking regulations to maintain the operational status of my primary checking account, the one Tony and Chantel have limited visibility on due to my monthly contributions. Move the entire remaining balance, including all proceeds from the recent rental income of my condo, into the newly established Irrevocable Trust, EB Legacy Trust. Confirm the City Library Foundation remains designated as the sole unchangeable beneficiary. This trust, set up months ago under Sarah's guidance, as part of my own prudent, forward-thinking estate planning, was designed specifically to be untouchable, legally firewalled, protecting the vast bulk of my liquid assets from any future claims, contests, or manipulations. Second," I continued, my voice steady despite the painful necessity of the words, "immediately execute the standing instruction to change all designated beneficiaries on my life insurance policies, my primary investment accounts, both taxable and retirement, and my supplemental retirement annuities. Remove Anthony Brown entirely. Replace him across all instruments with the EB Legacy Trust as the primary beneficiary." A brutal, heartbreaking, but absolutely necessary step. Through his actions, his conspiracy, he had forfeited his right to inherit the fruits of my life's labor. Third, I instructed, moving down the list, contact the City Pension Board Administration immediately. Inform them, citing potential identity theft concerns. Use Protocol Nightingale security authorization to cease all direct deposits into my current checking account, effective with the next disbursement cycle, which I believe is the 1st of next month. All future pension payments, without exception, are to be routed electronically via secure transfer, only to the new secure account we established last month, at the Federal Credit Union, account number ending in 7. This account was entirely off the grid, unknown to Tony and Chantel, linked only to my burner phone and a private secure P.O. box address I had set up weeks ago. Tony's coveted prize, the pension he was so arrogantly plotting to seize, was now being rerouted beyond his reach. Finally, Arthur, I concluded, effective immediately, place the highest level security alert and monitoring protocols on all remaining accounts under my name, however minor, require multi-factor biometric authentication, plus mandatory verbal confirmation directly with me using our pre-agreed security phrase, "The Mockingbird sings at midnight." For any transaction exceeding $500, any attempted change of address or contact information, or any request whatsoever for account information or access. Consider it all done, Esther, Arthur confirmed, his voice calm, efficient, deeply reassuring. The wire transfers will be initiated immediately under Nightingale protocols, clearing by end of business day. Beneficiary changes will be processed and confirmed electronically within the hour. Pension rerouting requests submitted under security flag. Enhanced multi-factor and verbal confirmation security protocols are now active across all platforms. Your financial fortress, he concluded, using our old shorthand, is hereby officially secured. Thank you, Arthur, I said, feeling a wave of profound, almost overwhelming relief wash over me. The primary objective was achieved. Your discretion in this matter is, as always, absolutely paramount. Implicitly understood, Esther, he replied warmly. That goes without saying. Please take care of yourself. And don't hesitate to call if you need anything further. Anything at all. My second call, equally crucial, was to Sarah Jenkins, my sharp no-nonsense estate lawyer, the legal architect of Protocol Nightingale. Sarah, I said, again using the burner phone for security. It's Esther Brown. The situation we discussed has escalated. I need you to finalize and file the Nightingale addendum to my will and all related trust documents, effective immediately. The Nightingale addendum was the legal codicil we had drafted months ago, held in reserve. It formally, explicitly, and in excruciating legal detail, disinherited Tony completely, citing specific carefully worded reasons related to potential undue influence, actions contrary to my stated wishes and well-being, and a fundamental breach of fiduciary trust, language meticulously crafted by Sarah to withstand any potential future legal challenge based on claims of diminished capacity or coercion. It also contained strict, unambiguous instructions, reinforcing the irrevocability and sole beneficiary status of the EB Legacy Trust and appointing Sarah herself, along with Arthur Bell, as co-executors of my estate with broad discretionary powers to defend my final wishes against any and all challenges, using estate funds as necessary. Understood, Esther, Sarah replied instantly, her voice crisp, professional, devoid of unnecessary sentiment but conveying absolute competence. Sad that it came to this juncture, but as we discussed, being prepared was the prudent course. The documents are finalized and ready for electronic filing. They will be filed with the probate court registry this afternoon. Certified copies will be dispatched via secure courier to your designated P.O. box by tomorrow morning. Consider your wishes legally, irrevocably secured. With those two crucial calls completed, the core of my financial defenses was firmly, impregnably in place. My liquid assets, the vast majority of my wealth, were shielded within an untouchable trust structure, destined for philanthropy, not for funding BMW leases. My future income stream, the coveted pension Tony was so arrogantly plotting to seize, was rerouted to a secret, secure account entirely beyond his knowledge or reach. My inheritance plans, my final statement of my life's values, were legally altered, fortified against any posthumous claims. Tony's plan to make sure she gives me her pension had just collided head-on with a reinforced concrete firewall he didn't even know existed. He could ask, he could pressure, he could manipulate, he could even potentially try to forge my signature, a possibility Sarah and I had discussed and built safeguards against. But the money itself, the actual tangible resources, was now physically, legally, permanently beyond his grasp. Phase 1 of my counterplan was complete. The bank was closed, permanently. With my financial assets secured, fortified behind impenetrable legal and electronic walls, the next phase of my counterplan shifted focus to the physical front. My exit strategy and my destination. My temporary stay in Tony and Chantal's loft was now definitively over, but I couldn't just walk out onto the street. I needed to reclaim my own home. My condo wasn't just a condo. It was my condo. 2 bedrooms, bright, airy, overlooking a small park, fully paid off for over a decade. Located in a vibrant, walkable neighborhood filled with independent bookstores, cafes, and the familiar faces of neighbors I'd known for years. A place filled with my own comfortable furniture, the pieces currently in storage, my extensive library, my memories of David pottering in the small balcony garden we'd cultivated together. It was the sanctuary I had foolishly temporarily surrendered out of a misplaced sense of maternal obligation. It was time to take it back. My agreement with Tony and Chantal regarding my move-in had been verbal, informal. A significant mistake in retrospect, born of misplaced trust in my own son. But my agreement regarding the rental of my condo was formal, professional, legally documented. As part of their plan, I had rented out my condo through a reputable professional property management company, Citywide Rentals, generating a steady stream of market rate income. Income which ironically more than covered my $1,500 monthly contribution to their household expenses, with a healthy surplus deposited directly into my secure accounts. They were in essence unknowingly funding their own subsidy through my asset. Now I needed to break that lease. My next crucial call made again from the burner phone during a quiet afternoon while Chantel was out at a crucial design meeting, likely getting a manicure, and Tony was on the road closing deals, likely playing golf or extending his lunch hour, was to Mr. Henderson, the senior property manager at Citywide Rentals who handled my account personally. Mr. Henderson, I began, my voice polite but firm, conveying a clear sense of purpose. Esther Brown calling regarding the property at 12 Maple Lane, Unit 5B. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Ah, Mrs. Brown. Not at all. Always a pleasure, he replied cordially. He was an efficient, experienced professional who appreciated clear communication. Everything all right with the tenants? Haven't heard any complaints. Rent is always paid on time. The tenants are fine, I assume, I said, getting straight to the point. However, my personal circumstances have changed rather unexpectedly and significantly. As the legal owner of the property, I find myself needing to reoccupy my primary residence, effective as soon as legally permissible according to the terms of the lease and state law. There was a slight, almost imperceptible pause on the other end of the line. Mr. Henderson was sharp. He likely sensed the underlying urgency, the unspoken drama. Reoccupy, I see. Well, Mrs. Brown, as you know, the current tenants are on a standard one-year lease agreement. It's not due to expire for another. He paused, likely consulting his digital files. Ah yes, another 7 months until the end of May next year. Breaking a lease prematurely can be quite complicated, potentially involving legal challenges or significant financial penalties for the owner, unless there are specific legally recognized grounds outlined in the lease itself. I understand completely, Mr. Henderson, I interrupted calmly, refusing to be deterred. I had anticipated this potential obstacle and had already reviewed my copy of the standard lease agreement Citywide used, as well as our specific property management contract. My years of navigating complex institutional regulations hadn't left me entirely unprepared for bureaucratic hurdles. However, if you'll recall the specific management agreement we signed when I retained your services, there is a particular clause we discussed. I believe it was Clause 7B, pertaining to owner reoccupation under specific unforeseen personal hardship circumstances. That clause allows for the owner to terminate the lease with expedited notice, provided suitable predefined compensation is offered to the displaced tenants for their demonstrable inconvenience and relocation costs. Another pause, longer this time, filled perhaps with the faint clicking of keyboard keys as Mr. Henderson likely scrambled to locate and review our specific less standard contract. I heard the faint rustle of papers, or perhaps just his sigh. Ah, yeah, Clause 7B, he finally conceded, his tone shifting slightly, acknowledging he was dealing not with an uninformed novice, but with someone who her own contract intimately. Personal hardship. Expedited notice. Suitable compensation. Yes, you are correct, Mrs. Brown. That specific provision does indeed exist in your customized agreement. Excellent, I said, allowing myself a small internal sigh of relief. The legal pathway was clear. Then please initiate the process immediately. Serve the current tenants with the legally required minimum notice as stipulated under Clause 7B. I believe it's 30 days in this jurisdiction for this specific circumstance. Please handle the communication delicately but firmly. And please inform them, concurrently, that I, the owner, deeply regret the inconvenience and will be providing them, upon their vacating the premises in good order by the deadline, with a compensation package equivalent to 2 full months' rent, plus fully covering their documented moving expenses up to a reasonable pre-agreed limit. Emphasize my desire for a swift and amicable resolution. I knew the compensation was generous, significantly exceeding any legal requirement, but it was a strategic investment. It would make the tenants far more likely to cooperate fully, vacate promptly, and avoid any potential legal challenges or delays that could complicate my own timeline. Mr. Henderson, clearly impressed, perhaps even slightly stunned, by the generosity of the compensation offer, which would make his job of managing the tenant's departure infinitely easier, readily agreed, his professional enthusiasm returning. Consider it done, Mrs. Brown. That's exceptionally fair. 30-day notice will be drafted and served via certified mail tomorrow morning. I'll personally handle all the negotiations with the tenants regarding the compensation details and their confirmed move-out date. I anticipate a smooth transition. Unit 5B will be professionally cleaned and ready for your reoccupation in approximately 4 weeks, perhaps even sooner if they find alternative housing quickly. 4 weeks. Approximately. A perfect buffer. I would need a temporary place to stay, but it meant I had a secure destination, my home. My final call that day, the last piece of the logistical puzzle, was to Discreet Moves, the high-end moving and storage company whose Nighthawk service had caught my eye during my earlier research. They specialized in exactly what I needed: speed, efficiency, absolute discretion, and the ability to operate outside of normal business hours, often handling sensitive corporate relocations, witness protection moves, or the aftermath of messy high-profile divorces. Yes, I said to the calm, professional dispatcher on the other end of the secure line, my voice low and confidential, ensuring no one else in Tony and Chantal's apartment could possibly overhear. I require an urgent premium off-hours packing and moving service. The collection location is Tony and Chantal's full address. The task involves the careful packing and removal of all personal belongings from the guest room, and a list of specifically designated household items belonging solely to Esther Brown from the common areas of the residence. A detailed, itemized list with photographs will be provided electronically prior to the team's arrival. The initial destination is a secure, climate-controlled storage facility. I gave them the details of my existing anonymous storage unit, pending final delivery instructions to a new residential address in approximately 4 weeks. I paused, then added the crucial constraint. The key operational requirement, I emphasized, is that this entire operation must be conducted late Sunday night, beginning no earlier than 11:00 p.m. sharp, and completed with the premises fully vacated by your team, absolutely no later than 5:00 on Monday morning. Absolute silence and discretion are paramount. Can your Nighthawk service accommodate this precise time frame and these requirements? Ma'am, the dispatcher replied, his voice utterly unfazed, conveying a sense of absolute competence that was deeply reassuring. For our premium Nighthawk service, discretion and off-hours execution are our specialties. We can move mountains in the dark, silently. Consider it scheduled. Our 3-person specialist team will arrive precisely at 11:00 p.m. Sunday in an unmarked vehicle and will be completely clear of the premises by 04:30 a.m. Monday. Guaranteed. You'll receive a confirmation email shortly with the team leader's secure contact number for final coordination. I provided my Centurion card details, a card linked to one of my secure hidden accounts, chosen specifically for its lack of connection to my known banking relationships, to cover the substantial premium fee for the specialized off-hours service. The call ended. Phase 2 of my counteroffensive was complete. The logistical machinery for my physical extraction from their lives, and the simultaneous strategically significant removal of my assets from their home, was now fully engaged, programmed and set to execute under the cover of darkness while they slept, dreaming their greedy dreams. They thought they were closing in on my pension, preparing to deliver the final blow. They had no idea I was already orchestrating the removal of my person, my property and my entire financial scaffolding from their lives, leaving them with nothing but the echo of their own entitlement, the hollow shell of their subsidized existence, and the rapidly mounting pile of bills they now had no conceivable way to pay. The analyst had run the numbers, the strategist had deployed the assets, the execution was imminent. Sunday night arrived cloaked in an almost preternatural stillness, unusual for Tony and Chantal's normally bustling or perhaps just noisy apartment. They had gone out for the evening, a last-minute invitation eagerly accepted to some exclusive pre-launch party for a new downtown lounge that promised Instagrammable cocktails and encounters with minor local celebrities. It was the perfect opportunity, the final piece of logistical serendipity in my meticulously planned escape. They had left around 8 p.m., leaving me, as usual, to hold down the fort, assuming I would be quietly reading in my room, perhaps knitting, embodying the harmless domestic role they had assigned me. They hadn't even bothered to ask if I minded them going out. My presence, my preferences were simply no longer factors in their calculations. Their absence was, of course, exactly what I had hoped for, planned for. At precisely 10:55 p.m., 5 minutes before the scheduled arrival time, my burner phone vibrated silently in my pocket. A discreet, encrypted text message from the Nighthawk Team Alpha leader, ETA 5 minutes. awaiting visual confirmation at designated rear service entry point. Showtime. I went quickly, silently, to the back door, the designated staff entrance located off the small cluttered laundry room, the very door they had so insultingly insisted I use for my daily comings and goings. Tonight, ironically, it would serve as the gateway for my liberation. I peered through the peephole. The back alleyway was dark, deserted. I switched the small dim porch light on, then off again twice, the prearranged low-profile signal. A moment later, a large, dark, unmarked moving truck pulled silently to a stop at the end of the alleyway, its engine barely a whisper, its headlights extinguished. 3 figures dressed in dark, nondescript work clothes that blended into the shadows emerged and moved swiftly, silently towards the back of the building, carrying only small toolkits and rolled-up padding. The team leader, a compact, efficient-looking man with watchful eyes, greeted me at the door with a quiet, almost imperceptible nod. "Mrs. Brown, Team Alpha, ready for instructions." His voice was a low, professional murmur, barely audible above the distant city hum. "Thank you for coming," I whispered, unlocking the back door. "Speed and absolute quiet are essential. My housemates could return unexpectedly." "Understood, ma'am," he replied, his voice a low, professional murmur. "We're ghosts." And they were. For the next 3 hours they moved through the house with a level of coordinated, silent efficiency that was truly breathtaking. It was like watching a well-rehearsed military operation. First, my room. 2 team members tackled it with incredible speed and precision. Clothes were whisked from the closet and folded into wardrobe boxes in seconds. Toiletries were swept from the bathroom counter into padded containers. The few books and personal items I had already boxed up were sealed and labeled. They even dismantled the cheap daybed and dresser silently, wrapping the pieces for removal as per my explicit instructions. I wanted no trace of my presence left. Within 20 minutes my room was stripped bare, returned to its original state of sterile and personal emptiness. Then came the more delicate phase, the removal of my property from the common areas. I had prepared a precise itemized list, complete with photographs, which I now handed to the team leader. These were items I technically owned, items I had brought with me from my old house or purchased myself since moving in, items they had seamlessly, arrogantly integrated into their own lives, likely assuming they were now theirs by default. The list included the large, comfortable, high-quality sofa and matching armchairs in the living room, the solid oak dining table and chairs, the antique end tables David and I had painstakingly refinished, the large hand-knotted Persian rug I had inherited from my grandmother, several valuable antique lamps David and I had collected, the large framed landscape painting inherited from my own mother, the high-end espresso machine I had purchased for the kitchen, and even the large flat-screen television in the family room, a gift I had given them the previous Christmas, the ownership technically mine until formally gifted, a nuance I was now exploiting. The moving crew worked with astonishing speed and stealth. Each item was carefully wrapped in padded blankets, maneuvered silently through doorways and down hallways, and loaded onto the truck. They moved like shadows, communicating with hand signals, their feet silent on the hardwood floors. Within 2 hours the truck was fully loaded. The team leader did a final silent walkthrough with me, confirming every item on my list was accounted for. He handed me a secure tracking number for the shipment to my storage unit. "Operation complete, Mrs. Brown," he whispered. "We were never here." They slipped out the back door as silently as they had arrived. The unmarked truck pulled away, melting into the pre-dawn darkness. I stood alone in the slightly emptier, strangely echoing house. The air felt cleaner, lighter. I had surgically removed my presence, my contributions, my very essence from their lives. All that remained was the hollow shell of their own making. Before dawn painted the eastern sky with its first faint strokes of gray, my own departure was executed with the same quiet, decisive, unsentimental precision as the movers. There was no lingering, no second-guessing, no sentimental last look around. My connection to this loft, to the life I had briefly, unhappily inhabited within its walls, was irrevocably severed. I conducted my own final walkthrough, surveying the subtly altered landscape of the main living areas one last time in the dim pre-dawn light. The living room looked strangely unbalanced without the comfortable, substantial sofa, armchairs, rug, and end tables, the remaining trendy but flimsy furniture looking lost and inadequate in the large space. The dining room felt cavernous without the solid oak table. The absence of my mother's landscape painting left a large accusing blank space above the minimalist fireplace. Even the kitchen counter looked somehow less impressive without the gleaming espresso machine. It wasn't sabotage, it was simply subtraction. The removal of value. A quiet physical manifestation of the withdrawal of my support. Satisfied with the visual impact. Subtle enough to cause confusion before the dawning realization, significant enough to underscore their dependence, I proceeded to the final administrative task. On the gleaming empty kitchen island, where Tony and Chantal often left passive-aggressive notes for me, I placed my own final communication. I took out a crisp sheet of plain white paper and my good pen, using my neatest analyst-like handwriting. I wrote, date Monday, November 27, 2025. Approximate 0:45 a.m. To Anthony Brown, Chantal Brown, from Esther Brown, subject formal termination of informal residency arrangement, and cessation of all financial contribution. Dear Tony and Chantal, pursuant to conversations overheard on the evening of Thursday, November 23, 2025 regarding my continued residency and future financial obligations, I wanted them to know without a shadow of a doubt that I heard everything, understood everything. It has become unequivocally clear that my continued presence in this household is untenable and my contributions are viewed merely as an entitlement to be exploited. Therefore, effective immediately upon my departure, I am formally terminating our informal residency arrangement. Furthermore, all financial contributions from my personal accounts towards household expenses, including but not limited to direct transfers, utilities, groceries, and miscellaneous unrepaid loans, are hereby ceased. Attached, please find copies of the outstanding utility bills. Electric, gas, water, premium cable, internet package, initiated without my consent, which arrived during the past week. As per standard tenant responsibility, payment for these outstanding balances now rests solely with you. My personal belongings, as well as certain items of furniture and household goods legally belonging to me, a detailed notarized inventory can be provided upon written request to my legal counsel, Ms. Sarah Jenkins, have been removed from the premises. All future correspondence should be directed exclusively to Ms. Jenkins' office. Please refrain from attempting to contact me directly. I wish you success in managing your future financial obligations. Sincerely, Esther Brown, Senior Financial Analyst, City Transit Authority, retired. I added my old title deliberately, a final reminder of the competence they had dismissed. I clipped the stack of unpaid utility bills neatly behind the note, and placed the small, potent stack precisely in the center of the kitchen island. Then I picked up my two modest suitcases. I walked not to the staff entrance at the rear, but to the grand front door. I let myself out into the cool, pre-dawn air, closing the heavy door softly but firmly behind me. The black sedan from the car service was waiting silently at the curb. Arthur, the same discreet driver, standing patiently by the open rear door. He took my bags without a word. I slid into the comfortable leather seat. The Marlowe Hotel, downtown please, I instructed. I wasn't going straight to my condo. The tenants needed time to vacate. A few days of quiet, anonymous comfort in a good hotel felt like a well-deserved reward. Arthur closed the door and the car pulled away smoothly from the curb, leaving the loft building silent and unsuspecting in the slowly brightening dawn. I didn't look back. There was nothing there worth seeing. The financial analyst had successfully restructured her portfolio and eliminated the non-performing toxic assets. The books were balanced. The account was closed. I imagine their return later that Monday morning was filled with the buoyant, slightly smug satisfaction of a mission accomplished. Tony and Chantal likely pulled up to the building's loading zone around 9 or 9:30 a.m., perhaps nursing slight hangovers from a weekend spent celebrating their perceived cleverness and imminent financial windfall. My pension. With them, as I had anticipated, was a small, rented U-Haul truck, probably driven by Tony, and two of his buddies, guys from the dealership, lured by the promise of free beer and pizza in exchange for some heavy lifting. Their plan, as I'd pieced it together, was clear. With Mom Esther now presumably cowed into accepting either the nursing home or the necessity of finding a damn job, the large guest room was finally theirs for the taking. The moving truck wasn't for moving me out. It was for moving more of their own stuff in, specifically the bulky components of Tony's home gym equipment, which had been languishing in their overcrowded garage, and perhaps some new oversized executive desk he'd ordered in anticipation of claiming his new office. They were arriving as conquerors, ready to consolidate their hold on the territory, plant their flag firmly in the most desirable room, and begin enjoying the spoils of their victory over the inconvenient old woman. I can picture Tony, key fob in hand, brimming with confidence as they ride the service elevator up. "All right, boys," he'd probably boom, gesturing magnanimously as they walk down the hall. "Operation Command Center is a go. Let's get this unloaded." Chantal would follow him in, perhaps already mentally redecorating the space, envisioning the perfect aesthetic for her husband's new power-affirming office. Their buddies would trail behind them, ready to haul the symbols of Tony's triumph into place. And then, the laughter would die. The confident strides would falter, stopping abruptly just inside the doorway. The smug self-congratulation would evaporate, replaced by a sudden jarring ice-cold splash of wrongness. The loft didn't feel right. Something was missing, and the air, instead of smelling like victory, suddenly smelled faintly, chillingly of absence. The initial impression wouldn't have been total, shocking emptiness. Their own cheaper furniture would still be there. The trendy but flimsy love seat, the glass and chrome coffee table, the generic abstract prints on the walls, the basic structure of their curated life would appear intact, at first glance. But the feel of the house, the atmosphere, the underlying sense of quality and comfort, would be instantly undeniably altered, diminished, less substantial, less luxurious than they remembered. Tony would probably stop dead in the foyer, his brow furrowing. "Huh? Did Consuela the cleaning lady come early? Place feels different, emptier." Chantal, perhaps drifting towards the living room, would be the first to notice the gaping void. "Tony?" Her voice would hold a new note of rising confusion. "Tony, where's the sofa? The good one? Your mom's sofa?" The large, high-quality sectional I had brought from my old house, far superior to the cheap, trendy love seat they'd previously owned, was simply gone, replaced by empty space and perhaps the faint accusing indentations on their pristine white carpet. "What are you talking about?" Tony would stride impatiently into the living room, only to stop short himself, his own eyes widening in disbelief. Not just the sofa and armchairs, but the antique end tables David and I had refinished, and the large hand-knotted Persian rug I had inherited from my grandmother, the one piece of genuine quality in their sterile room, gone, vanished. Their confusion would rapidly morph into frantic disbelieving searching. They'd rush through the downstairs rooms, their voices escalating in panic. The dining table. Chantal would shriek from the formal dining room. The solid oak table and chairs, a wedding gift to me and David decades ago. The centerpiece of countless family meals was gone, leaving the room feeling cavernous and cold. And the painting, Tony would yell, my mother's beloved landscape painting, the one emotional anchor in their modern decor, had disappeared from its place above the minimalist mantelpiece, leaving only a large, accusingly blank space. Even the goddamn espresso machine. Chantal would wail from the kitchen. The high-end Italian machine I had purchased, tired of their complaints, was missing from its prime spot on the granite countertop. "Are you kidding me? She took the damn TV too?" Tony would roar, finally reaching the family room, staring in disbelief at the empty wall mount, the tangle of useless HDMI cables dangling like severed arteries. The large, expensive flat-screen television, my ill-advised Christmas gift, had vanished. Their initial assumption might be robbery, a bizarre targeted robbery focused on specific high-value household items. But then the final chilling, undeniable piece of the puzzle would slam into place. Tony, his face now pale with a growing, sickening suspicion, would bound down the hall, his bewildered buddies trailing behind. He'd throw open the door to my former room, the room he was so eager to claim. Empty. Not just empty of me, completely, utterly, surgically stripped bare. The cheap daybed, the dresser, even the curtains, gone. I'd decided, in a final act of thoroughness, to have the movers take the few pieces they had designated as mine, just to underscore the point. The room was a blank, sterile box. He'd checked the closet, empty, the small bathroom, bare shelves. She wasn't robbed. The thought would hit him with the force of a physical blow. She didn't just leave in a huff. She packed. She planned this. She took her stuff. She took our stuff. No, wait. Her stuff that we were using. The distinction suddenly, terrifyingly becoming critically financially important. The realization, she packed. She planned this. She took things, wouldn't initially compute as a strategic counterattack. In their self-absorbed worldview, my departure, even with the mysterious, surgical disappearance of key furniture, would likely be interpreted first through the lens of my perceived emotional fragility. The frail, irrational, deeply wounded old woman, upset by their plotting and her own misunderstanding, had thrown a massive, disproportionate, slightly unhinged tantrum. She had run away, taking not just her clothes but bizarrely, inexplicably, taking the sofa and the TV with her, perhaps out of sheer senile spite, or perhaps intending to sell them to fund her escape. Confusion therefore would likely give way not immediately to fear, but to a mixture of indignant annoyance and a certain smug, vindicated relief. Good riddance. The problem had solved itself, albeit messily. Now they could finally get on with their lives, redecorate the empty room, enjoy their freedom. The missing furniture was bizarre, certainly irritating. How dare she take the TV? But ultimately, in their minds, replaceable. They'd just buy new, better stuff. Put it on the Amex. Problem solved. But then, as the initial adrenaline rush of discovery began to fade, the other colder, more practical implications would start to filter insidiously through the fog of their self-congratulation, planting seeds of genuine dawning panic. Chantel, perhaps collapsing onto the remaining cheap love seat, which suddenly felt very small and inadequate in the large, echoing living room, might be the first to voice the most immediate, pressing concern, her mind already fast-forwarding to the end of the month. Wait, Tony, if she just left like this, does that mean she's not, contributing anymore? That $1,500, is that just gone? The sudden unexpected absence of that reliable, substantial monthly transfer, the crucial buffer that likely kept their precarious finances afloat, covering everything from the organic grocery bill to the minimum payments on their maxed-out credit cards, would loom large, terrifyingly large, in the sudden quiet. Tony, still perhaps high on the adrenaline of his perceived territorial victory, focused more on the acquisition of his new office space than the subtraction of my financial support, might dismiss her concern initially with a wave of his hand. Relax, babe. Don't borrow trouble. We'll manage just fine without her little handout. In fact, it's probably better this way. Less obligation, and think of the money we'll save not having her around. Plus, he'd add, perhaps already mentally measuring the empty guest room for his sauna, I finally get my office. This is a net positive. But the unease would linger, refusing to be dismissed. It would grow subtly, insidiously as the day wore on, as they began to notice the cumulative effect of the missing items, the subtle downgrades to their environment. The slightly emptier house would feel colder, less comfortable, less impressive. The stark absence of the good sofa would be keenly felt every time they tried to relax in the living room. The lack of the high-end espresso machine would be a daily grating irritation, forcing them back to their unreliable cheap model, or expensive daily trips to the barista. The missing flat-screen TV in the family room would leave a gaping, unfillable hole in their evening entertainment routine. These weren't just objects they had lost, they were integral, functional parts of the luxurious, comfortable lifestyle they had taken entirely for granted, parts that had been largely subsidized or directly provided by me, the woman they had just driven away. Replacing them, they would slowly begin to realize, would cost thousands of dollars they simply didn't have. The real panic, however, the gut-wrenching, world-altering, existential panic, would likely begin its slow, inexorable creep over the next few days, perhaps even the next week, as the concrete, unavoidable financial consequences of my departure started to land with the brutal, undeniable force of collection notices. The first major utility bill would arrive. Electricity, gas, water, significantly higher than usual, due to their own profligate consumption patterns. The constantly running AC, Chantel's endless laundry cycles, Tony's 2-hour showers, but now landing squarely, entirely in their lap, without my substantial $100 contribution automatically allocated to soften the blow. Staring at the 3- or 4-figure total, panic would begin to prickle. The premium cable and gigabit speed internet bill, the ridiculously expensive package they had upgraded to months ago without consulting me, deeming it essential for their work and entertainment needs, would land with a similar thud. Another few $100s they hadn't budgeted for. The credit card statements would arrive electronically, pinging ominously on their phones, detailing their own extravagant, unchecked spending from the previous month, the designer clothes, the expensive dinners out, the endless stream of Amazon packages, balances likely already nearing their limits, with no expectation now of mom quietly, discreetly covering the shortfall with another timely loan. The interest charges alone would be staggering. And then, the big one. The one they likely hadn't even considered. The rent. The astronomical rent payment for their glass box in the sky, due on the 1st of the month. Without my $1,500 contribution, they'd have to cover the entire massive sum themselves. They might even realize that my $1,500 was not just helping with the rent, it was the only thing making the rent payment possible at all. The full devastating realization would dawn then, slowly at first, then with sickening irreversible speed. They weren't just missing my direct $1,500 monthly contribution. They weren't just missing the periodic loans. They were missing the entire vast invisible financial infrastructure I had been providing, the quiet, unacknowledged subsidy that made their entire precarious lifestyle possible. Where was Mom? The question would become frantic now, desperate. What had really happened? How could she afford to just disappear? Where did all her money suddenly come from? The questions would spin in their heads, leading only to more confusion, more anger, and now a rising tide of pure, unadulterated financial terror. They'd call my old number again, frantically, repeatedly, disconnected. They'd send desperate pleading emails to my deactivated account, bounced back. They might even stoop to calling old friends of mine they barely knew, neighbors from my old street, desperately seeking some clue, some forwarding address, some way to reconnect with the walking ATM they had so foolishly, so arrogantly, driven away. But I had covered my tracks meticulously. I had vanished into the secure anonymity my foresight and finances provided. The initial confusion and annoyance would curdle fully into pure raw existential panic. Then, where would the money come from? Now, how would they possibly cover all these suddenly exposed bills? Could they afford to stay in the apartment at all, even for another month? The rented moving truck they had so triumphantly brought home that morning to install Tony's gym equipment would sit idle, accusatorily in the loading zone, its intended purpose suddenly rendered tragically moot by the terrifying, rapidly approaching prospect of having to use it to move all their own belongings out. The two buddies who had come so cheerfully to help would likely have made hasty, awkward excuses hours ago and disappeared permanently. Sensing the toxic cloud of impending financial disaster gathering heavily overhead, Tony and Chantel would be left utterly alone, trapped together in their suddenly too large, too empty, too expensive glass box in the sky, staring into the terrifying abyss of their own profound financial irresponsibility, finally brutally laid bare by my quiet, decisive departure. The discovery of the note, that single sheet of crisp white paper lying starkly against the dark granite of the kitchen island, likely happened amidst the rising tide of their frantic searching and escalating panic. Perhaps Chantel, in a desperate, almost superstitious attempt to find some clue, some message, some forwarding address I might have carelessly, emotionally left behind in a moment of maternal weakness, would be straightening the already obsessively tidy kitchen counter for the 10th time. And there it would be. Not hidden, not tucked away, but placed deliberately, centrally, unavoidable. The small, neat stack of recently arrived, glaringly unpaid utility bills, topped by that single folded sheet bearing my familiar, meticulous, slightly old-fashioned analyst's handwriting. They would snatch it up simultaneously, perhaps, their hands colliding, their eyes scanning the cold, formal, utterly unexpected text, searching desperately for answers, for explanations, perhaps even for some sign of the emotional breakdown, the grief-stricken vulnerability, the pleading request for reconciliation they still, perhaps expected, maybe even hoped for from me. Instead, they found only cold, hard, devastating facts. Date, Monday, November 27, 2025. Approximate 04:45 a.m. To Anthony Brown, Chantel Brown, from Esther Brown. Subject: formal termination of informal residency arrangement and cessation of all financial contributions. The official subject line alone, devoid of any familial warmth, chillingly professional, mimicking the cold, impersonal tone of a corporate memo announcing immediate, unavoidable, and deeply unpleasant restructuring, would be the first sharp jolt, utterly alien, utterly terrifying in its implications. Dear Tony and Chantel, pursuant to conversations overheard on the evening of Thursday, November 23, 25 regarding my continued residency and future financial obligations, she heard us. The realization would hit them simultaneously, instantly, like a physical blow stealing the breath from their lungs. She knew exactly what we planned. This wasn't a reaction to some imagined slight. This was a response to the conspiracy. Confirming the hostile and exploitative intent expressed therein, it has become unequivocally clear that my continued presence in this household is not only untenable but actively unwelcome. Furthermore, it is demonstrably evident that my voluntary financial contributions, intended as temporary support during a period of familial need, have been egregiously misinterpreted, Not as limited assistance, but as a permanent entitlement to be systematically exploited and potentially misappropriated to fund an inherently unsustainable lifestyle. Exploited? Misappropriated? Us? How dare she use those words? The denial would be automatic, reflexive, a desperate sputtering attempt to cling to their shattered narrative of victimhood, even as the cold, hard, undeniable truth of her carefully chosen words began to seep like poison into their consciousness. Therefore, effective immediately upon my departure from these premises this morning, approximately 050 a.m. I am hereby formally terminating the informal verbal residency arrangement, established approximately 6 months ago upon your urgent and repeated request. Terminating? She can't just terminate. Furthermore, please be advised that all voluntary financial contributions previously made from my personal accounts towards shared household expenses, including but not limited to direct monthly transfers $1,500 6 months is $9,000 total provided. Coverage of specific utility bills now revealed to average approximately $350 a month above baseline $210 total subsidy. Grocery costs estimated conservatively at $400 average dollars a monthly a $200 total benefit. Miscellaneous personal loans extended upon request currently unrepaid, totaling $3,000, and any implied subsidy towards underlying rental obligations, are hereby permanently ceased, effective immediately. Ceased? All of it? The $1,500, the loans? The specific numbers cold and hard meticulously documented, spelling out the precise, quantifiable extent of their dependence, their exploitation, would be like salt in the wound. Attached for your immediate attention and urgent action, please find copies of the most recent outstanding utility bills. Electric alarming amount, due first, gas equally alarming amount, due third, water sewer, shocking amount, due fifth, premium cable internet package, initiated without my prior knowledge or consent and clearly exceeding basic household needs. Outrageous amount, due 30th, which arrived during the past week, as per standard tenant-occupant legal responsibility, the timely and full payment for these substantial outstanding balances, as well as all future household expenses incurred henceforth, now rests solely and entirely with you. Solely with us? But she always just handled those. How much are the? They'd flip frantically, desperately through the attached physical bills then, the unexpectedly high balances, the imminent due dates, likely inducing fresh, visceral waves of nausea, dizziness, and pure unadulterated panic. As you will have by now undoubtedly noted upon your return this morning, my personal belongings have been completely removed from the premises. Additionally, certain specific, high-value items of furniture and household goods, legally belonging to me, which were generously placed in the common areas for shared use. A detailed, notarized inventory list, complete with photographs and verifiable proof of purchase or inheritance documentation, has been prepared and can be provided upon formal written request submitted through my designated legal counsel, Miss Sarah Jenkins of Jenkins & Associates, have also been retrieved into my sole possession earlier this morning. Legal counsel? Notarized inventory? Proof of purchase? She took the sofa? The TV? The good espresso machine? The painting? Yes, I did. And I documented it meticulously, legally. All future correspondence regarding any outstanding matters should be directed exclusively, in writing via registered mail, to Miss Jenkins' office. Please refrain from attempting to contact me directly via my previous phone number, which as of noon today, November 27th, will be permanently disconnected. My previous email address, which as of this morning has been deactivated and scrubbed, or through any other direct or indirect channel. No contact allowed? Lawyer only? Disconnected number? Deactivated email? This isn't just mom being angry and running away in a huff for a few days. This is formal. This is legal action. This is permanent severance. I wish you both every success in navigating and managing your future financial obligations and personal responsibilities independently and, perhaps more responsibly. Success? Obligations? Independently. Responsibly? Is that sarcasm? It definitely feels like cold, cutting, devastating sarcasm. It feels like a final, dismissive judgment. Sincerely, Esther Brown, Senior Financial Analyst, City Transit Authority, retired. My old professional title added deliberately. A final, quiet, pointed reminder of the competence, the expertise, the financial acumen they had so foolishly, so arrogantly, so fatally dismissed. The note wasn't an emotional outburst, raw and messy. It wasn't a tear-stained plea for understanding or a desperate cry for reconciliation. It was a severance package, a corporate restructuring memo, announcing the immediate closure of an underperforming parasitic subsidiary, a cold, hard, meticulously documented, legally fortified withdrawal of all services, all support, all assets. It confirmed their deepest, darkest fears, leaving absolutely no room for doubt, denial, or misinterpretation. She heard the plot. She knew their intentions. She wasn't confused or weak or financially dependent. She was calculating, deliberate, financially independent, legally prepared, and utterly, completely, irrevocably finished with them. The plenty of money they had so casually, so arrogantly discussed hijacking wasn't just her modest pension that might cover a car lease. It was the substantial, ongoing, invisible financial scaffolding that had been quietly, thanklessly propping up their entire precarious, performative lifestyle for months. And she hadn't just left in a huff, running off to impose on some other unfortunate relative they could perhaps track down later. She had strategically, systematically, surgically pulled the plug on their life support. She had taken her money. She had withdrawn her support. She had even reclaimed her stuff. The tangible symbols of quality and comfort they used daily. The very items that made their trendy loft feel luxurious and successful. The realization would hit them then, with the force of a physical blow, knocking the last breath of denial from their lungs. They hadn't just lost a potential future income stream they felt entitled to plunder, her pension. They had lost their current, essential, irreplaceable financial subsidy. They weren't just dealing with an empty guest room they could now gleefully repurpose for Tony's home gym. They were dealing with a significantly emptier, less comfortable apartment, and a suddenly terrifying, immediately due stack of substantial bills they had no immediate conceivable way to pay. The old woman they thought they could easily manage, manipulate, exploit, and ultimately discard had just demonstrated, with chilling, analytical efficiency, that she held all the cards, including perhaps the deed to their future financial solvency, and she had just decisively, permanently, ended the game, walking away from the table and leaving them holding nothing but debts, consequences, and the bitter ashes of their own greed. Their panic wouldn't just be about finding Mom anymore, trying desperately to lure her back into the fold with false apologies. It would be about their own imminent, terrifying financial survival in a world suddenly brutally stripped bare of her invisible, taken-for-granted safety net. The aftermath of absorbing the cold, precise, devastating truth contained in that note wouldn't be quiet contemplation or remorseful reflection. It would be pure, unadulterated, chaotic pandemonium, the carefully constructed facade of their successful, harmonious, Instagram-perfect life. Wouldn't just crack under the strain, it would shatter completely, violently, revealing the raw, ugly, terrified reality of their financial desperation and poisonous mutual resentment underneath in a spectacular explosion of blame and panic. Tony, his face likely fluctuating between an apoplectic shade of purple rage and a sickly pale disbelief, would almost certainly react first, his default mode in any perceived crisis being loud, aggressive, impotent bluster. Legal counsel withdrew all contributions, ceased payments, took the damn sofa. Who the hell does she think she is? After everything we've done for her. He might slam his fist repeatedly, violently on the now bare spot on the kitchen island where the gleaming espresso machine used to sit, the impact echoing hollowly, unsatisfyingly in the suddenly too large, too empty space. He might kick one of the remaining cheap, trendy dining chairs, sending it skittering across the polished concrete floor until it crashed loudly into the wall, leaving a satisfyingly destructive mark, a physical manifestation of his internal chaos. His fury wouldn't just be directed outwards, at me, the absent architect of his sudden, inexplicable downfall. It would be the impotent, cornered rage of a man whose brilliant, sure-thing scheme, his masterful plan to secure his financial future, through simple filial exploitation, has just spectacularly, humiliatingly, inexplicably backfired, exposing not just his profound financial vulnerability but his own staggering incompetence, his utter failure to accurately assess the situation, and leaving him financially naked and exposed. Chantel, her carefully applied mask of sophisticated cool composure dissolving completely into a puddle of terror and self-pity, would likely collapse into full-blown hysterics, perhaps sinking dramatically onto the cold concrete floor where the luxurious Persian rug used to lie, her body racked with loud, ugly, gasping sobs that held no trace of her usual curated elegance. Her expensive, meticulously applied makeup would stream down her face in black rivulets of mascara and despair. "I told you, Tony," she'd shriek between sobs, the blame game igniting instantly. Predictably, I told you pushing her about the pension was too soon. I told you she seemed different lately, quieter, watching, but you wouldn't listen. She trusts me, you said. She won't suspect a thing, you said. She's just a simple old woman, you said. Now look, she's gone. The money's gone. The TV is gone. The sofa is gone. How are we going to pay the rent on this place? How are we going to pay for the BMW lease next week? The kids' private school tuition is due. We're ruined. We are absolutely completely ruined. And this is all your fault. Her carefully curated world, the one defined entirely by brand names, status symbols and the constant exhausting performance of wealth, was collapsing, and her only recourse was panicked, accusatory, ultimately useless despair. Tony predictably would round on her, his own raw terror and burning humiliation fueling his inherent cruelty, deflecting the blame with vicious targeted precision. My fault. Are you freaking kidding me, Chantal? You were the one complaining constantly about her being here, invading your space, cramping your precious style. You were the one drooling over the new X5 every time we drove past the dealership. You were right there with me, nodding along like a damn bobblehead, planning exactly how we were going to spend her pension money. Don't you dare try to pin this entire catastrophe on me now. You're just as culpable, just as greedy as I am. Maybe more. Their two buddies, Ricky and Dave, the ones who had arrived so cheerfully with the rented moving truck just an hour or two earlier, ready for a morning of light work followed by the promised reward of free pizza and cold beer, would be standing awkwardly trapped in the doorway or foyer, silent, deeply uncomfortable, horrified witnesses to this sudden, violent, unexpected implosion of domestic bliss and apparent financial security. They would likely exchange deeply uneasy, wide-eyed glances, suddenly realizing they had inadvertently stumbled into the middle of something far stranger, far uglier, and potentially far more legally complicated than a simple furniture move for a friend. They'd murmur urgent, mumbled, overlapping excuses about needing to get back to the dealership immediately, suddenly remembering crucial appointments, needing to feed non-existent pets, needing to be literally anywhere but here, caught in the crossfire of this escalating disaster. And they would beat a hasty, awkward, almost comical retreat, wanting absolutely no part of this toxic cloud of financial ruin and marital disintegration, leaving Tony and Chantal completely alone to drown in the poisonous stew of their own making. The rented U-Haul truck, still parked accusingly in the loading zone downstairs, its ramp lowered expectantly, ready for cargo that would never arrive, would become a monument to their failed ambition. Its empty cargo bay a stark mocking symbol of their current and likely permanent predicament. Left utterly alone in the echoing, slightly bare loft apartment, their argument would likely escalate further, spiraling downwards into even uglier, more desperate territory, fueled now by raw, unadulterated fear and vicious, cornered recrimination. How could this have possibly happened? How could Mom, quiet, simple, predictable, easily managed Mom, have possibly orchestrated such a swift, devastating, financially ruinous counter-move? How could she afford lawyers, discreet movers, a new place to live? Where did all her money suddenly inexplicably come from? Did she inherit more from Dad than she ever let on? Did she have secret accounts all along? Was her entire simple life just an act? The questions would spin uselessly in their heads, leading only to more confusion, more suspicion, more impotent anger, more poisonous blame, hurled back and forth like verbal grenades in a rapidly shrinking foxhole. The stark, unavoidable reality of the unpaid bills stacked accusingly, silently on the kitchen counter like a ticking time bomb counting down to financial oblivion, would become the new terrifying focal point of their shared, mutual terror. How much was actually owed? Right now, this month, when were they due? Next week? Where in God's name would the money come from now, without Mom's steady, reliable monthly infusion, without the possibility of further loans? Panic, raw, visceral, existential financial terror would finally, fully set in, eclipsing the anger, eclipsing the blame. They'd scramble frantically through their own online bank accounts, confronting the likely meager, shocking, terrifyingly low balances hidden behind their performative spending, their carefully curated Instagram feed, portraying perpetual, effortless luxury. They'd realize then, with sickening irreversible clarity, just how much they had utterly, completely, foolishly relied on my steady monthly contribution, how dangerously close to the financial edge they had been living for months, perhaps even years, cushioned only by my quiet, consistent, completely unacknowledged subsidy. Tony might truly rage then, perhaps punching a wall, leaving a satisfyingly expensive hole in the drywall that their security deposit wouldn't cover, perhaps throwing his expensive smartphone across the room, shattering its screen, adding yet another unexpected, unpayable expense to their rapidly growing mountain of debt. Chantel might curl into a fetal position on the cold concrete floor, sobbing uncontrollably, mourning not just the loss of her perfect life, the impending social humiliation, but the terrifying uncertainty of their suddenly bleak, uncurated future. Their carefully curated world, built on a foundation of lies, leverage, image, and by-exploited generosity, wasn't just cracking under the strain anymore. It was collapsing violently, completely into a black hole of their own creation, pulling them down with it. The plenty of money they thought I possessed, the money they felt so arrogantly entitled to control and consume, wasn't just gone, its sudden absolute absence now threatened to swallow them whole, dragging them down into a pit of debt and consequence they might never ever climb out of. They had thought they were cleverly securing their financial future by targeting my pension. Instead, with breathtakingly ironic, self-destructive precision, they had just utterly definitively detonated their present. The freakout wouldn't just be about the shock of my departure or the sting of my note. It would be about the terrifying, undeniable and entirely self-inflicted consequences raining down upon their heads like biblical hail, unavoidable and utterly deserved. While the storm of their own making raged, hurricane force within the trendy but now financially toxic walls of Tony and Chantel's loft apartment, my own world settled into a profound, almost luminous peace. A few weeks later, after my 30-day stay at the Marlowe Hotel had concluded, Arthur Bell, my steadfast financial advisor, and Sarah Jenkins, my sharp-eyed lawyer, confirmed all was in order. The tenants in my condo had vacated smoothly. Miss Henderson had the unit professionally deep-cleaned and painted, and my belongings were moved out of storage. Unlocking the door to Unit 5B at 12 Maple Lane, my condo felt like coming home in a way I hadn't truly experienced, hadn't allowed myself to fully feel, since David was alive. Walking into the familiar, welcoming space, filled again with my things, my comfortable, well-loved furniture, my towering stacks of books breathing their familiar papery scent, my cherished photographs whispering memories, felt like stepping back into my own skin after months spent wearing an ill-fitting, uncomfortable, suffocating costume. It was smaller than Tony and Chantel's cavernous loft. Yes, it lacked the trendy high-end finishes, the performative gloss, but it felt right. It felt like mine. Solid, authentic, earned deeply, peacefully, mine. I spent the rest of the afternoon and evening unpacking, not with frantic energy or anxious haste, but with a quiet, joyful, almost meditative deliberation that felt like a sacred ritual of reclaiming each book placed lovingly back onto my own familiar, overflowing bookshelves, finding its rightful, cherished place among old friends. Each familiar photograph of David and a younger, happier Tony carefully arranged on the mantelpiece, acknowledging the complex tapestry of the past, the love that was real, without letting the recent pain and betrayal overshadow everything. Each comfortable, well-worn armchair, each familiar lamp settled back into its rightful, accustomed place, recreating the geography of my sanctuary. It was an act not just of organizing possessions but of actively, consciously reclaiming my identity, my history, my sense of self, my narrative from the wreckage of their making. As the sun began to set, casting long golden shafts of light through the clean, familiar windows, painting the small park across the street in hues of orange and peaceful pink, I made myself a cup of my favorite Earl Grey tea in my own chipped but cherished ceramic teapot. I carried it out onto the small balcony, the one overlooking the quiet, tree-lined street, and the park where David and I used to walk hand in hand in the evenings. I sat down in my favorite old wicker chair, the one David had bought me for our 10th anniversary, its cushions faded by sun but perfectly molded to my shape after years of quiet contemplation. I took a slow, mindful sip of the hot, fragrant tea, letting the familiar warmth spread through me, chasing away the last vestiges of the chill that had seemed to settle in my bones during my time in their house. Peace. A feeling so profound, so complete, so utterly pervasive, it felt almost like a physical presence, a soft, warm blanket settling gently into the spaces within me, where the anger, the anxiety, the suffocating sense of being trapped and devalued, had resided just days before. My phone, my real phone, the one with my secure private number known only to Arthur, Sarah, and a handful of trusted old friends whose loyalty was unquestioned, buzzed softly on the small wrought iron table beside me. It wasn't Tony or Chantel. Their old numbers were blocked, their desperate pleas unheard, their self-inflicted drama firmly permanently excluded from my newly established carefully guarded sanctuary. It was a brief encrypted email notification from Arthur Bell, my steadfast rock-solid financial advisor. Subject: Financial Update. EB Secure Fortress Protocols. Fully active and monitored. Message confirming all requested asset transfers complete and irrevocable per Nightingale. EB Legacy Trust fully funded and legally shielded. Pension successfully rerouted and second deposit confirmed received into Credit Union Act 1878-9. This AM. Enhanced multi-factor biometric and verbal confirmation security protocols remain active and tested across all remaining minor accounts. Financial Fortress remains secure and impenetrable. Recommend you relax. Perhaps procure some excellent local seafood for dinner. My treat invoice to follow for reimbursement. And enjoy a well-deserved exceptionally peaceful evening. Best regards as always, EB. I smiled faintly, a genuine quiet smile of deep, bone-deep satisfaction and profound gratitude for Arthur's competence and loyalty. Fortress secure. Indeed, my financial independence, the fruit of 40 years of hard work and careful planning, was safe, protected, utterly beyond their grasping reach. I thought briefly, clinically almost, devoid of residual emotion, of Tony and Chantal. I had heard through Sarah that they had defaulted on their loft's rent and were being evicted. They were apparently trying to move in with Chantal's parents. I pictured them surrounded by unpaid bills, recriminations, and the terrifying unfamiliar landscape of actual financial responsibility.
Did I feel guilt?
Absolutely not. An ounce? Not even a gram. Regret? Only that it had ever come to this painful juncture, that my own son had forced my hand through his weakness, his greed, his profound, almost pathological lack of character. Satisfaction, yes, a quiet, deep and entirely justified satisfaction. Not a gloating pleasure in their inevitable suffering, necessarily, though perhaps a small, fiercely protective, undeniably human part of me felt a grim affirmation in their well-earned downfall, but rather a profound satisfaction in the restoration of order, of consequence, of a certain cold, mathematical, unavoidable justice. The financial analyst in me, the core of who I had been for 4 decades, had successfully assessed a dangerously toxic parasitic situation, had accurately identified the primary risk factors, their unchecked entitlement, their profound financial instability masked by performative spending, their fundamental lack of moral compass, had implemented decisive, preemptive risk mitigation strategies, protocol Nightingale activation, asset shielding, communication firewalls, had restructured the portfolio my life to decisively, surgically eliminate the non-performing, value-draining, toxic assets, both financial and emotional, and had successfully executed a controlled, strategic, low-collateral damage to myself exit. The lesson, though harsh, had been delivered swiftly, efficiently, and with undeniable documented clarity. Case closed. The books were balanced. The account was permanently, satisfyingly closed. I took another slow sip of tea, letting the warmth spread through me, chasing away the last lingering vestiges of the chill that had seemed to settle deep in my bones during my time cohabiting with their cold ambition. The future stretched before me, quiet, secure, unburdened, and entirely blessedly my own to write. I had my books, my memories, the good ones now starting to resurface, less clouded by recent pain, my hard-earned financial independence, and this peaceful familiar sanctuary to call home once more. It wasn't the retirement I had originally planned alongside David, filled with shared travels and quiet, easy companionship, but it was a good retirement nonetheless. A retirement reclaimed, a retirement built on a lifetime of hard work, careful planning, resilience, and the quiet, unshakable strength they had so foolishly, so fatally underestimated. Let them freak out. Let them grapple with the consequences they had so eagerly, so arrogantly sown. I had found my peace, and that, I knew with the absolute certainty of a perfectly balanced ledger, the quiet hum of compound interest working in my favor, was the only bottom line, the only true measure of wealth, that truly mattered in the end.